Welcome to another episode of My Wake Up Call. I got to change the introduction, but I'm not that creative. This is where I meet people briefly and I want to hear more from them. And I stop them and I say, stop. You got to be on my podcast and you got to tell this on the podcast. And we have another one like that. And I think you're going to fall in like, if not in love, as I did with Janice Litvin. She's on a mission to help leaders and teams banish burnout in their organization so their employees can come to work healthy, happy, and ready to work. She does this through keynotes, workshops, accountability groups. She has a best-selling book out called Banish Burnout Toolkit. Banish Burnout Toolkit. I'll get the flow of it. And helps you and your teams learn how to manage stress to prevent burnout. The result is long-lasting behavioral change. What makes you unique is her 20 years of technology recruiting, 10 years in IT, study of psychology, and experience changing her own behavior. And we're going to unpack that also. What I really liked in this introduction, besides it being brief, was when she said the result of banishing burnout is long-lasting behavioral change, because she may not know it and my listeners may not know it. I have a fledgling company that's in beta called Michelangelo Mindset. And you can go to it, Michelangelo Mindset, and you can even share how we can make the thing and our journey better. And the idea is Michelangelo saw the angel and the statue of David in the marble and just carved away everything that wasn't it. And so why her introduction grabbed me, because she said, if you can carve away why they're getting burned out, you're actually going to reveal that their desire to work for you wasn't killed off. It was just stuck under all that junk. And if you can find a way to relieve them of it, guess what? They're going to discover that they want to come to work. So I think that's terrific. And I think Janice is terrific. Janice, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark, and that beautiful introduction.
Well, beautiful introductions for beautiful people. What is it that Forrest Gump said about a box of chocolate? I can't remember it. Anyway, but I will ask you what I ask all my guests, kind of what's your calling, what's your purpose? What is something that you believe that when you look back at your life, you'll say, I think this will still be it. And then share the story of Janice and what led you to that, and take us down some winding roads and some cliffhangers, and we'll have a great time.
Well, it's funny, Dr. Mark, because I have gone through a lot of winding roads. When I was in high school, my mother said, a girl with a technical degree will never go without a job. And so I majored in math and became a computer programmer. There was only one key problem. I didn't like being a computer programmer. I realized very quickly I love spending time with the users and doing trainings. And so that was the beginning back then of my foray into becoming a stand-up trainer, so to speak. There's so many stories. I don't want to tell the whole thing because I think you'll get bored. But I did post a week ago that it was the 12-year anniversary of my becoming a Zumba instructor. And so I'll start there, because after 20 years of being a technology recruiter with a long technology background, including the tech training, we hit a recession, as everybody knows, in 2008. And there were no jobs, so there was no recruiting. And after 20 years, I was ready for a change. So I had no idea what to do. I was just stupefied, so to speak. But I thought, it's time to get in shape. So I would drop my son off at school and I'd be ready to go straight to the gym every day. I started out on the recumbent stationary bike, then the sit-up, then the treadmill. And then I ventured into the group fitness room and found Zumba fitness. And after a few months, I did become a Zumba instructor with our founder, Beto Perez, the master. And I went along very happily teaching Zumba classes. I love to dance, and I loved helping other people be inspired and have fun and laughing. That's the best way to exercise, is be with friends and find a fun environment, something that happens regularly. But after a couple of years, I thought I still need some other mental challenge. And I went to lunch with an area Zumba trainer who was famous in the aerobics world in the 80s. And he said, well, what have you not done in your life that you still want to do? And I said, professional speaking. So I had to drive all the way to Sacramento from San Francisco to figure out what I wanted to do. So I quickly got on my horse and joined Toastmasters and then National Speakers Association. I wanted to speak about fitness. So I found the world of workplace wellness, went back to school and got certified in exercise science, where I learned anatomy, physiology, nutrition, and psychology, which is what I resonated with the most. And slowly but surely started doing workshops on healthy eating and fitness. And then a few years ago, a client called and said, we want you to do a workshop on stress, but we've already done mindful meditation. We don't want all that. We want you to go deep. And, you know, somebody who loves psychology can go pretty deep. And I said, well, I'll go deep, but I don't think you'd want me to go all the way. So I created this program that I called Banish Burnout. And that was it. They gave me 3 weeks notice and I pulled it off and it went over beautifully.
Wow. Well, and how did you come up with that notion? I mean, it's a wonderful title, Banish Burnout Toolkit. How did you come up with that as the focus?
So I had been in part of my research in becoming a speaker. I knew stress was a big problem. I mean, you could just see it and this was several years ago. So I wanted, like she said, go deeper. So I really wanted to help people truly make change. Yes, mindful meditation is helpful. Yes, fitness is helpful. Sleep and healthy eating and getting outside, all those things are helpful, but they're more helping of the symptoms and not the cause. And I'm a person that likes to get into the root cause of things and help people get underneath why they act the way they do. For example, have you ever been in a situation where you're talking to someone and maybe they're asking for advice and you give them the advice and then they flip out and they say, you know, you shouldn't be so critical, or something like a way overreaction? That's a clue that they haven't dealt with some emotional baggage that they need to unpack and deal with. And I'm not, unless I'm a really good friend of theirs, I'm not going to say, hey, you need to let go of some emotional baggage. Nowadays, I might hand them my book. But the point is, I wanted to help people deal with situations like that, managers as well as individuals.
So unpack going deeper, and I hope you're in good hands. I mean, I am a shrink and I've had a few years under my belt. So take us as deep as you can go underneath it all.
Okay. So back in the 80s, I went to therapy. I went to a Jungian therapist and went to her for 8 years. And as you probably know, Jungians don't like endings. But after 8 years, I thought, okay. And 1 year before, I had already started cutting back from weekly to monthly, and she couldn't even deal with that. Her schedule was always getting messed up because of me. But anyway, so we had an ending. Fast forward maybe 10 or 15 years, and I'm noticing that there are still situations where I take things too personally or overreact to things. And so I realized, as they say, when you unpeel the onion, you get deeper and deeper and deeper. I realized there were still some things I needed to deal with in my own life. And so I went on a journey to help myself not take things so personally, not always jump to a conclusion that I'm being rejected or left out. I was feeling like the pattern in my life was I'm setting myself up for feeling rejected when really it's not about me. And then I was at a bar mitzvah party with my mother, of all places. We're dancing, we're having a good old time. And two of the cousins were off on the side chatting. Looked like friendly party chatter. But my critical mother, who I did love very much, jumps into her high gear and says, wonder what they're talking about with their heads all huddled together. And in that moment, it hit me where all those negative feelings and self-doubt and self-rejection came from. And right then and there, I realized, now I know where it came from. Now I know what to do.
And what did you do?
I went on a quest to figure out what I needed. I started doing intense journaling, and I did some research and discovered the world of cognitive behavior therapy, which, as I'm sure you know, helps people understand how they're activating limiting beliefs and limiting behaviors and not feeling as good as other people and not as deserving as other people. As a matter of fact, just earlier this year, I did work with a neuro-linguistic programming coach to really dive deep into where some of that specifically came from.
So can I share an anecdote with you? And if it triggers you, we'll deal with it. Are you open?
Of course, I'm game.
Do you trust me enough to get into a little trouble, possibly? And
yes, it'll be fun. I love trouble.
So I'm retired now. I mean, I'm licensed, but I look pretty good for someone in his 70s, I think. Maybe I don't. But some years ago, I was working with a woman, a high-achieving, dynamic woman who was just amazing. And I've been her mentor, coach for a number of years. I remember I was seeing her and I suddenly got this realization. And I said, I know what you're most afraid of. And it's not being criticized, rejected, or put down. You don't like those and they trigger you, but you're used to it because because you're someone who's like a warrior. And I remember she stuck her chin out and she said, what am I most afraid of? And then I looked her right in the eye and I said, what you're most afraid of is feeling unconditionally safe and loved. And there is nothing you can do to earn it. And there is nothing you can do to lose it. And feeling unconditionally, emotionally safe as well. Mm-hmm. So she paused and then her head flinched. And then she started to tear up, and then she started to cry, and then she started to really cry, and she then collapsed to her side and just sort of, on her side was on the couch for several minutes, and she just cried like a baby, maybe pun intended, like a baby.
Yeah.
And in about 5 minutes, she got up, her mascara was all over her. And I said, what was that about? She said, you just hit a nerve that was so deep.
Right.
And she said, I've lived my entire life coping and sweeping situations under the rug because I never felt safe, but I had to soldier on.
Right.
But I'm not healed.
Right.
I cope.
Right. We put on a front.
And coping is better than not coping.
Right.
But so can you understand what she might have been feeling?
Absolutely. I just did a workshop earlier this week, and things come out of my mouth sometimes, even though I have exactly what I'm going to say and my PowerPoint slides and all that. But afterwards, people didn't leave the meeting, so we stayed on. And that's when the juicy bits came out. And what I realized is that every single thing that has happened in our lives has a memory. Emotionally, like your body remembers a car accident, your heart and soul remember all the emotional wounds. And as much therapy and journaling and all that stuff you do to heal and going to a therapist, psychoanalyzed, it's all there. And it can just jet out at the most unexpected times. And we soldier on. In fact, I was labeled a wellness warrior this week, and I'm like, I'm not really a warrior, but thank you. And we soldier on and we put on a brave face. And I believe deeply that most people in the workplace are hiding their unresolved emotional baggage, and that deep down inside, there are children that just need love, basically.
So let me ask you something. When you did this, and then it went on after the presentation, if I was an attendee in that audience, would I say that what went on after the presentation was better than the presentation?
I wouldn't say it's better. I would say it was different.
So here's
So I knew I was in a room mostly full of salespeople in a very high achieving environment, biological supplies and equipment environment, that people right on the front lines supplying the labs. And it's a very intense environment, the supply chain, the COVID, all that stuff. And all of a sudden, I started talking about sales and how to recover from losing an important sale. And I'm like, I'm not a sales trainer. I've been involved as an entrepreneur. You're involved in sales to that degree, and I've studied sales, but I never really call myself a sales trainer. But suddenly I was talking to them about how to deal with recovering from a sales loss. So that was pretty exciting.
and was this off the script when you were talking
sales,
about?
Yeah, the whole sales thing was completely off topic, but it was like the very last thing in the after party.
And how did they respond to it?
They loved it. They ate it up. They kept staying and putting things in the chat, and I stayed until the very last person left.
So here's something I've been thinking of doing, but I don't know if I have the courage to do it. I gave a talk in Russia for 6 hours. It was just me.
In English or Russian?
I don't speak Russian, but in real time, it was translated into Russian.
Yeah.
And they have that way of doing it. And so I'm speaking in English. And I had PowerPoint, and the technology got screwed up. So there was a point at which I just went commando.
Yeah.
And I just said, oh, the heck with the technology. And when I went spontaneously, it was much better.
Yes.
Because what I was tracking with, and I have a feeling you're able to do this, is I was tracking with the engagement of the audience.
Yes.
And what I learned, and so now I try to do presentations with as little PowerPoint as possible, because I think what would happen is I would often hide behind the slides. Mm-hmm. It would screw up my tempo. And so I'd be in conflict. Should I be, for the obsessives in the audience, should I make sure that I cover all the slides? If I don't, I look unprepared. Right. Or should I respond to what I'm picking up in the audience, which is they're not as engaged. And so what I'm now doing is more and more just speaking without slides. And I have some idea where I want to go, but I'm not sure how I'm going to get there. And so I take them along on the journey. And I remember I gave a talk to a bunch of CEOs, and a couple said to me, they said, you were riveting because I didn't know what you were going to say next. And I said to him, neither did I. So I'm just sharing that with you because I think people, as they get Zoom fatigue, they get death by PowerPoint. I think you have that in you, that sensibility. And I'm just saying, I think it taps a nerve in people that have just been PowerPointed to death or Zoomed to death, that you could talk with them, engaging with them. And if you grow in that direction, it's a huge opportunity because I think audiences are hungry for that.
So I had sort of a situation like that a couple of years ago. I did this program, Banish Burnout, and we had the luxury of 90 minutes instead of 60. So I had the time for 3 breakout exercises, which I had all planned out. And I gave them a handout. They knew exactly what they were doing, what page they're going to. And after each breakout where they went away, so to speak, and did their own thing and came back after 6 minutes, then we had discussion. There was much richer and much deeper discussion when they were solving each other's problems and I was there as the facilitator. I learned things, they learned things, they helped each other. And I felt like that was like you're talking about, that was the beauty and the richness of the event. And that is what people remember.
Now, I've been told recently that it may be inaccurate, but that the best presentations are 80% interaction, 20% content.
Yes. And I think that's the trend. To the degree, depending on the situation, to the degree you can engage the audience.
Now, I can understand if you're listening in and you're an engineer and people want to hear algorithms and you're mutually sharing jargon that's not jargon to you because you're all specialists. I can understand that doesn't relate to what you're listening to, but I'm guessing you wouldn't even be listening to this podcast if you were that kind of person. So it probably doesn't apply to any of my listeners.
But interestingly, as an ex-software engineer, engineers have feelings too. Mm-hmm. They might need more help pulling it out, but they do want to have fun. They do have an emotional side.
That is absolutely true. You're right.
They're humans after all.
Well, that is true. So tell us more about your journey, and if, without editing it, I'd like you to imagine it's, say, 3 years from now. That's my ambivalence. 1 year is too short. 5 years is too long. But let's pick 3 years. And I would like you to imagine it's 3 years from now and you wake up, and at least in the professional part of your life, you could talk about personal if you want, but in the professional part of your life, you do a 360, it's 3 years from now, and you say, I can't believe how great it is. I can't believe what I get to do today. What would you be seeing 3 years from now?
Oh, well, I have to ask you a question. What do you mean if you do a 360? That infers that I'm doing something completely different.
No, that's probably maybe it's a 180, meaning you wait.
I'm a math major. You've got to be specific.
So look, I'll go first because I'm a little bit older, and I'm in my early 70s, and if I wake up 3 years from now, first of all, I say, well, looks like I'm still alive. It's a good day. But if I wake up and I look out at my professional life, I think what I would think is, I can't believe that I get to interact with people that I look forward to seeing. There is not a single person that I don't look forward to seeing today. Yes. Now, I can understand I'm only human. I probably wouldn't look forward to seeing someone in which I'm going to be held accountable to something that I'm dragging my feet on. But to me, that would be amazing, as opposed to waking up and saying, oh, I got to deal with this person. I got to deal with this situation. So for me, at the stage of my life, I actually did a Tedx talk called What Made You Smile Today? You might want to check it out. So I would see myself waking up and saying, I get to smile all day because of the people I'm interacting with and what we're going to be interacting about. So if you applied the same to yourself, and it's 3 years from now, what would you see?
Okay. So I have done a couple of big stage events before the COVID, of course, and a lot of workshop type events. And I'm headed towards the bigger events, not just because I want the accolades and I want to be in front of a lot of people, but when I go to an event, I don't just stand up and speak. I come a day or two early. I stay a day or two after. I have meals with people. I love to talk with the people. I love to really get to know the people and let them ask me questions and try to have a deeper, bigger impact. On top of that, I offer, depending on the client, an after party, so to speak. I offer what I call the Banish Burnout Book Club. I don't charge extra for it, where people can come and we can do more of that facilitation type of work, but it's fun. It's not like work for me. I love it. And they can let their hair down, so to speak, because their managers aren't there, and they can talk amongst themselves and do a lot of problem solving in a case like that. And that to me would be a lot of fun.
So how could you morph what you're doing so that it gets to be more like that? I mean, obviously, you need to present something. You need to present some body of information. It is a toolkit. There's workbooks, there's exercises, and whatever. But how could you morph it into it just being? Or maybe it's already being that way. You know, you found something that touches a nerve. Burnout is a hot topic. People are scared that their employees are resigning in droves because they're burned out, and help us to prevent that. And then afterwards, they get to spend time with you. So maybe it's already happening.
It is happening. There are different forms and formats, but the content is, like you said, it's basically the same. But there's two sides to the coin. There's a blog brewing in my head, and maybe it'll become more of a real document later. Burnout is a two-way street. So when we originally talked about stress and burnout, it was all about the person. And you and I started the conversation that way. It's about understanding your deep background and changing and all that kind of thing. But there's something that the system needs to work on in terms of burnout. Long hours, over control, hyper vigilance, where you're making your employees crazy, not giving them control over their work, too many hours, weekend hours when they work Monday through Friday. And it's a huge problem in the physician world and the frontline healthcare workers. The suicide rate is the highest among physicians. This was before COVID, and now it's exacerbated. And so systemically, we need to understand that first of all, there's no work without the worker. There's no productivity without the worker. If you burn them out, there's going to be no net profits. So you've got to treat them with love and care and respect. Just like, I always tell this example, or I haven't told it in a long time. In the movie, the remake of True Grit, with Haley Steinfeld, I believe she was 12 at the time and won an award. They're going and going and going there. It's like at the peak of the movie when they're about to catch these people that murdered her parents, and they're going faster and faster and faster. And the poor horse, you see the horse starting to, and these poor horse is frothing at the mouth. The horse collapses. They never gave the horse a break or water. You got to let people have a break. You got to let people have control and be informed and make decisions about their work. And if they don't like their work, or they don't like the mission and values of the company, yes, they're going to leave. And your revenues are going to fall.
So here's the challenge, and I'm so glad we're talking about this. People don't do what's important. They do what they care enough about. It's important for me to diet. I don't care enough about it to really be that strict about it. So how do we get the systems, who are good people, the CEOs, they're owned by corporations, they're being pressured, they're losing revenue, they have to make cuts. So, and you may not have an answer, and I probably don't have an answer either, but how do you get the people above who will agree with everything you just said, and they will nod from the neck up and then continue to do what they're doing? Any thoughts how we get the people from above to care enough about this so that they're willing to do this, because it means they have to stand up to the corporations. If you're a CEO of a hospital chain, but the corporation is judging just the profit and loss, they're not going to hear anything other than it being an excuse.
Right.
Any thoughts about how we can get the people in charge to care enough to make those changes? Or is it going to be the sorry thing that, oh, your hospital had 3 physician suicides, it's making the national press, you better do something temporarily? But any ideas? Because I would welcome any ideas you had.
Well, first of all, nobody likes change. And yet, change is a constant in a strange way. And so, yes, we're driven by the almighty dollar, especially in the case of hospitals. But interestingly, other than hospitals, which is a unique animal, other than hospitals, all the CEOs in America and the world found out that they could run their company with 100% remote work, and that these CEOs who demand people be in the office, even if they have to commute an hour and a half a day or an hour and a quarter by car, and then they got to take BART, which is our train system here in the Bay Area, that has no purpose. Now, with that said, there is beauty and value of people being together. But why does it have to be 5 days a week? And why does it have to be 9 to 5? Why can't they work from home 2 to 3 days a week, have some water cooler moments the other 2 or 3 days, and have their occasional Zoom meetings on the other days if they need them, and then go away and be trusted to do their work? If you treat your people with respect and treat them well and really know them and care for them like you do your family, you will earn the trust and the respect back, and they will be loyal to you. But if you abuse them, they will leave. So it's a simple dynamic, in my opinion. Now, in terms of hospitals, I don't have the exact answer. I am, interestingly that you brought this up, or we brought it up together, I am forming a small thought leader coalition to attack that specific problem. I've got some doctors on board, and I have an innovation expert and a healthcare consultant, and we're going to try to start talking through that particular problem to see how we can systemically help the healthcare system. You know, working doctors 24, 48, or 72-hour shifts is the stupidest thing I have ever heard of. It impacts the doctor or the whoever it is, and it impacts the patients. How is somebody who's napping intermittently helping a patient, how are they supposed to be sharp? Like, would you ask an airline pilot to fly for 72 hours without a break? That's ridiculous.
You know, it's interesting because I've seen some doctors recently for, you know, various things I'm dealing with. And there was one, she couldn't see me. You know, I waited an hour and a half to see her and, you know, past the appointment time. But when she came in, you know, she was so professional and caring, but I could see the stress she must be feeling because they were all short staffed and everything.
Right.
And I sent her a text because she also gave me, you know, I mean, she was very responsive. And I said, you're a very kind, it was a woman, you're a very kind doctor. And I could just feel how difficult it is to let that kindness shine through when you're under so much stress. And I just wanted to thank you for being my doctor. I got a text back. I'm sure she was crying.
Yeah.
You know, so it's amazing how, yes, make some of these systemic changes, but don't minimize what a small acknowledgement can do to people. And a lot of doctors will say, no, just take care of yourself. You know, we don't need acknowledgments. Just be compliant. Just follow through. We don't need anything. But I think all people can benefit from that kind of acknowledgement.
Well, one thing you just reminded me of without realizing it is, as I understand it from talking to some doctors, they are taught to have empathy without having empathy. They're taught to cut themselves off from their emotions because, you know, healthcare in a hospital is a life and death situation, and they don't want to get too emotionally tangled up. On the other hand, if they don't have an outlet for those emotions, that's when they actually begin to burn out and freak out and then lean towards the extreme of suicide, sadly. So I think that's also part of the solution.
You know, something I've observed, and maybe you've observed it because, and I'm speaking at an international burnout conference, so you and I can stay in touch about that. But maybe
I think it's the one I know about.
Maybe we're both in that one.
Ending physician burnout one?
That one, yeah. I'm one of
Yes, Jonathan Fisher is a friend of mine.
Oh, yeah. So are you speaking as well?
No, I'm a moderator.
Maybe you'll moderate. I think I'm on some sort of a panel. Who knows? But something I noticed over the years, it's amazing, and this may be true in a number of specialties, it's amazing how competent doctors can remain until they're really, really impaired. You know, by the time they really, and maybe it's the doctors, it's amazing how they will abuse themselves with overwork, but still be fairly competent. But then when it starts to finally impinge on their ability to do something, my guess is they plummet then, because by the time they reach that point, so many other things have already fallen apart. Their relationships, they're drinking too much, they're self-medicating. But yeah. It was really amazing to see that doctors, when it's showtime, maybe it's the same for people who are speakers. It's amazing how people can be a basket case, but when it's showtime, they pull it together. And then afterwards, they'll say to themselves, I can't keep doing it this way. I don't know how I pulled that one off. And if you're a speaker, you're smiling because you've been there. I've been there, where it's 5 minutes to showtime, and there's that immediately butterfly or panic thing, and then it's the best talk I've ever given. It's crazy,
right? And I've talked to other speakers about this. Like an hour before, I'm like, I don't even like this. Why am I doing this? I'm not good at this. Why did they hire me? I don't even enjoy this. And it's all these funny, crazy thoughts that all add up to giving you energy. It's like an actor going on a stage. I think they also go through some of these emotions and butterflies in their stomach right before they go on stage. And then they give a great performance. And I think it's similar for speakers.
Since we're both speakers, I want to share a funny anecdote that I don't think I've shared on the podcast. So years ago, I was speaking to a healthcare audience. And I've been journaling since 1976. So my listeners will know my sorry story that I dropped out of medical school twice for untreated depression, but I finished. Wow. And when I graduated, I started keeping a journal. And the day I graduated, my first entry that I wrote in was, I can't believe I made it through. They've released a crazy person. And I'm on volume 255, 45,000 pages, 9 books, 1,200 articles. So I've become a writer. So here's the crazy anecdote is I used to keep a journal, and rather than carrying it, I would tuck it in my belt behind my shirt, as opposed to carrying it, because it wasn't a teeny one. So I'm speaking to this audience, and then I want you to share an anecdote so I don't feel like a fool alone in this podcast. So I'm there in front of them, and the book starts to slip down my pants.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm starting to look like John Wayne, the way he'd say pilgrim, and I'm tilting myself, and I'm, from the chest up, I'm level, but I'm tilting my hips and everything because the book is falling down my pants.
Oh my God.
And so the people in the first few rows are looking at me like, what is going on with him? I was going through these contortions. And then there's a point at which, and the people way behind them couldn't see this. And then there was a point at which it fell. And so there goes slipping down my pant leg. And so what happens is I pause and I reach down and I pull the book out from my pant leg, and I say to the audience, yes, it's true. That is a journal in my pants, but I'm glad to see you.
Oh my God, what a comeback. Did you think of that at the last second?
And they broke up. And,
oh my gosh.
And then we did Q&A, and I did the Q&A, it went fine. And then I said, I have a question for you. And they all looked at me, and I said, should I keep the book bit?
Good one. Yes, I think you should keep the book bit.
I think I should.
So funny. Oh my gosh.
But do you have any stories of gaffes where you had to recoup and you were able to do it, or maybe not yet?
Somebody else asked me a very similar question last week for an article he's writing, and I did think of something. Now I can't remember what I told him, but it had to do with being very, very sensitive to who was in my audience, and this was several years ago, before pronouns became the thing that we all talked about. And I was trying to be super, super careful about using the right pronouns. A boss isn't always a he. Like when I graduated from college, and when you, bosses were mostly he's. And so that was a common pronoun that I used in relation to what a boss is. And so it took some really hard training to convert my brain and say, in my mind, bosses are women too. And so now I use the female pronoun, not because I'm trying to be a feminist, but because I want to be sensitive to the people in the audience. And this brings up another story. Talk about a gaffe. I was at Stanford. They have these wellness community days, and they invite people like me and wellness people from inside the organization and outside. And a very known Stanford professor who's written a lot of books, and he's done a lot of interviews, and he's spoken a lot. And he actually had the gall to say that women leaders in Silicon Valley act like men. And the women around me and I were like, what the heck? And this guy is so out of it. Like, he's your typical, what you would think of the absent-minded professor. He's so out of it, even though he writes about corporate culture and burning out America and is it all good for the profits and all that kind of thing. And then it came to big Q&A time. And I thought, I cannot let this go. And I've learned to temper my outbursts, but I really was, in the most respectful way, I said, listen, with the utmost of respect, I respectfully challenge your statement that women leaders act like men. And I challenge you to drive down the street to Silicon Valley and interview 100 leaders and line them up in this room and then come back and tell us that they all acted like men. Every single woman in the place came up to me after and said, we couldn't say it because we're from Stanford, but we're so glad you said it.
Oh, that's terrific. Wow.
I don't know if he took it in seriously or not, but I just was shocked that he was that out of it. And he's so lauded. I won't tell you his name right now.
I know something about Stanford. We can talk offline. I think I know who it is. Anyway, but that's another story. So what are some of the tips that you can leave for our listeners? If first of all, and you're the guest, what are some of the identifying clues that someone might be burning out?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. First of all, emotional outbursts, or the situation I described earlier where you're talking to someone and their reaction doesn't match the situation, where it's just way off. Or someone is coming to work, but they're not as on as they normally could be and should be. Or that they are losing sleep, they're irritable, they start separating and avoiding, they're not responding to their emails and phone calls in a timely manner. They're just not doing their work the way they used to. And first of all, I want to add that it's really, really important for managers to not sweep it under the carpet and to attack the stigma of mental health issues and take that person aside and say, I notice you don't seem to be your best spinning top lately. What's going on? If you want to tell me what's going on, how can I help you? What resources can I provide? Most large organizations have something called an Employee Assistance Program, EAP. And there are therapists standing ready around the country. You make an appointment and you can get a telephone appointment with somebody for 6 weeks or whatever it is you need. And maybe you need time off. Maybe one of your children is ill. Maybe one of your elderly family members is ill. Stress, like I said before, we're humans. And a good manager, first of all, will know enough about the person that they know that they're dealing with a sick elderly family member, that they've got 3 children and they play soccer on the weekends. And they'll know enough about the person's life because they will have spent time enough and said, how's Billy? I know he had a soccer game this weekend. And it shows that you care. And that's how you develop loyalty and trust going back and forth. So it's really important not to sweep symptomatic issues under the carpet.
But don't you find it a challenge that what you just shared was so valuable, but by nature, frequently men are emotionally shy by nature and default to strategy and logic and just even being interested on that wavelength to even know about people's personal life. And we're not talking about bad, insensitive men. It's just not their strong suit. So it's a real challenge, I would imagine, that for male managers don't often get into the details of life or what they would see as the minutia. And it's mainly because they're not very good at it.
Okay, so, this brings up a very big topic, but you brought it up. I'm going to go there. Most people are promoted for technical skills, whether it's law, finance, architecture, medicine, software, lab work, whatever it is. Some of them have emotional intelligence. Most of them don't. Some people have an innate way to connect to it. And once you teach them about it, they can spark into it. But many of them can't. They need the training. They need, even if they need a checklist, Monday, call every person on your team. Here are the questions you ask them. How was your weekend? How are your children doing? How's it going in school? What were their weekend activities? How did that make you feel? You have to kind of train them into emotional intelligence and empathy, because that's the way you connect with people. Take them out to lunch once in a while. And I know we're all still kind of working remotely, but you can go on a virtual personal walk with somebody with all the technology we have now and just talk about anything but work. What book are you reading? What's your favorite movie? What did you binge watch on Netflix this weekend? What was it that you liked? Any little thing except work is how you're going to learn about the people in your organization.
Those are such wonderful practical tips. And I can tell you that the people who listen to this podcast who need that most would be thinking, boy, it's so obvious to her, but I never would have thought of those questions. And, something that I'm proposing to the people that I'm working with is we guard our calendars, meaning when we have an appointment, we generally keep it because we don't want to flake out on the other person. And what you calendar, you often do. And if you can calendar, this is the time when I check in with how people are doing.
Right.
And these are the prompts on my computer screen about things to ask. What I would say to you, if what Janice is talking about is so foreign to you, if you can practice some of these hidden in plain sight prompts and take a moment to notice the reaction of the other person, what you're going to start to notice is they're going to be so appreciative. They're going to smile.
Yeah.
And if you can just, escape a little bit of your left brain prison and see that they really enjoyed it, it may make it easier to keep the habit going. I'll share an anecdote with you. I remember with my wife, we went to her 10th high school anniversary. And I was a real stiff. I mean, I was whining, when can we leave? I don't know anyone here. And so I don't know that I probably ruined her time, but I learned a little emotional intelligence and also to be more appreciative of the fact that when you go to your spouse's high school reunion, you are going there as their spouse. You don't have an identity. You are a function there to make her time more enjoyable.
Right.
So I think we get to the 20th high school reunion, and I have a secret that my wife doesn't know. I'm going to be such a good sport. And then I said to myself, what does it look like to be a good sport? And so I went there and I had this goal that by the end of the night, I would speak to 5 people I didn't know, and they would be glad that they spoke to me.
Right.
And by the end of the night, actually my goal was 3. I wanted to keep it modest, but by the end of the night, I had spoken to 5 people, and 3 of them, when we finished talking, took my hand in both their hands, looked me in the eye and said, it was really great speaking to you. And so afterwards, I thought to myself, what is it that I did?
I bet I know. I'm
me.
sorry, I interrupted you.
There you go.
I bet I know. I bet you asked them pointed questions about their own life.
I asked them pointed questions. I asked them, if they knew my wife, how they knew my wife. But I did something else. I asked them questions where they would say, I thought, I felt, I did. Because when someone can say, I felt this, I thought this, or I did this, they're fully expressing their whole experience. And so in my mind, I was like a sailboat tacking between starboard and port. So I would ask a question. So, geez, you were in that same, high school musical with my wife. So what'd you think about it? Or what'd you think about seeing some of your high school people 20 years later? Geez, when you've seen some people who look a little bit older, what does that feel like? And so, but what happened is I covered those three experiences, what they felt, what they thought, and maybe some actionable thing. Geez, what would you do differently when it's time for the 25th reunion? So I went back and forth between those things. And what I discovered is when I could get in a conversation, people to say the word, I felt this, I thought this, or this is what I would do. It's like I covered all of their experience.
Uh-huh.
And what was interesting is my wife wanted to leave before me.
Oh, that's hysterical. I think that's so cute.
What happened is I was having such a good time getting past my emotional and social shyness, because I have that. I'm an introvert. And so as we're leaving and we're driving home, I said, I had this plot that I was not only going to be a good sport, I was going to help you enjoy your reunion more than you usually do. And after I did it, I was going to say to you, I did this big favor for you. Now you owe me.
Uh-oh.
But instead I said to her, I had such a good time being a good sport and getting past my shyness that this one's on the house.
Oh. Are you keeping a tally?
But it was interesting. But you've been a delight. My listeners are going to love you. And they're not only going to love you, they're going to want to check out Banish Burnout Toolkit. So where can they find out more about you?
My website is janicelitvin.com. They can go there and download a free chapter of the book by clicking on book. And there are lots of videos and interviews and media appearances and all those kinds of things. I have a really fun website. So there's a lot to find there. That
is great. And I will tell you, I'm going to watch this one over again myself, because some of those prompts that come out so spontaneous with you, I wouldn't think to ask people some of those things. They were great.
Oh, thank you. That was one of the beauties of my mother. She was a great conversationalist.
And so are you. So thank you for being on. And to my listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of my Wake Up Call. This one was really fun. Well, they're all enjoyable, but Janice is fun, but she's not just fun. She has information. She has interactivity. You really should check her out, and you should have her come and speak to your organization if you're worried about your employees. She would be a treat and a gift. And you owe it to your employees to seek her out and hire her, for God's sakes. So thanks again for listening.
You'll get 10%.
There you go. No, Janice, this is on the house.
Good one. Thank you so much. It's been delightful, Dr. Mark. I really loved my time with you.
Well, and we loved our time with you. And thanks. And to be continued.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.